Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Everyone, I'm Bryce Duskett, and thank you for joining us today on Market Journal. The month of October rolls on, as does the fall harvest across the state. We've got a lot of ground to cover on this week's episode, so let's dive right in. Starting things off this time of year, some producers are making plans for cover crops. As a slow-growing cool season legume, red clover is suitable to under-sowing and to winter small grains. It continues to grow after small grain harvest and can be terminated in time for planting corn. We recently caught up with Nebraska Extension Soil Health Management Educator to learn more about red clover. Market Journal's Mike Straub has this story.
Red clover can be an excellent green manure that fixes nitrogen, suppresses weeds, and increases corn yields. It continues to grow after small grain harvest and can be terminated in the fall or following spring before corn planting.
Yeah, red clover can be a really beneficial crop, a green manure crop for winter wheat systems. It's relatively easy to establish. We can actually establish it by frost seeding early in the year. What we did was we planted it in late February or early March, preferably when the ground is still frozen or even on snow. Just broadcast it, and it will emerge. It will kind of hang on in the wheat crop. It doesn't do much growth. It doesn't interfere with the wheat at all. We never found any effects on the wheat yield. Once the wheat is harvested, that's when it really takes off. It produces a pretty nice stand. It can be terminated that fall or left until the next spring, and then killed in the spring before the next crop is planted.
Red clover also promotes many benefits to soil health by providing nitrogen, a habitat to soil microbes, and soil structure.
Other than that, the red clover will add nitrogen because it's a legume, so it fixes nitrogen from the atmosphere and adds that to the soil. But there's lots of other soil health benefits. Whenever we have a cover crop during a period that would otherwise be fallow, we have living roots in the ground. These roots are providing habitat and food sources to soil microbes, because most microbes in the soil live either on or very, very close to plant roots. So we're providing habitat for them. Plant roots constantly leach some simple sugars and amino acids, so that's a perfect food for those microbial communities. So what we have seen is increases in microbial communities, some increases in bacteria, even small increases in fungi, which are those microbes that really, really help us with our soil structure. So that's a very positive trend.
The best time to broadcast red clover seeds is in the late winter or early spring, while the ground is still frozen. This will allow it to take advantage of the moisture from the snow.
So there's definitely different establishment times, but the one that I would recommend is frost seeding in early spring. So broadcasting onto frozen ground, probably late February up to late March. I mean, in Nebraska, our springs can be very cold for a long time, but basically frost seeding on frozen ground or even snow. So that way the clover can take advantage of that moisture that's usually there in the spring and get going.
When comparing two studies involving winter wheat followed by corn, the organic study without nitrogen application yielded better corn than the conventional study with the application of nitrogen.
So I've done two studies. One was in an organic system with winter wheat followed by corn. Another one was in a conventional system, also winter wheat followed by corn. In the conventional system, we didn't see an effect on the corn yields. The winter wheat and the corn were also fertilized with nitrogen, so we didn't adjust the nitrogen or anything. In our organic study, we compared the red clover to a control which received no nitrogen, and in 1 year we did see a benefit. So the corn after the clover yielded more. In one year though, and that was the drought year of 2012, the corn after red clover yielded less, considerably less, because that clover took up a lot of soil moisture. So,
Undersowing red clover into winter wheat can help control weeds after winter wheat harvest and provide some nitrogen to next year's corn crop. For higher corn yields, clover should not be the only nitrogen source. Terminating red clover in the fall may allow more time for decomposition as well as soil water recharge. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Mike Straub.
Thanks for that story, Mike. If you're interested in learning more about cover crops, you can find just about anything you'd like over at the website cropwatch.unl.edu. Moving on now, when interseeding cover crops, there are a few different options available. This year, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln began a HighBoy cover crop interseeding project in partnership with several producers and organizations around the state. We got an up-close look at the process during a recent demonstration. Market Journal's Bill Dodd brings us this story.
In a cornfield located in southeast Nebraska, just north of Wahoo, producers got a first-hand look at the capabilities of a new HighBoy cover crop planter. This demonstration was intended to give producers an idea of the effectiveness of broadcast interseeding cover crops before harvesting corn using a high-clearance machine during the R5 stage of corn production. The goal with these demonstrations seeks to address two barriers to adopting cover crops in Nebraska. 1, getting enough cover crop growth prior to winter dormancy, and 2, time and labor required to manage cover crops. Furthermore, cover crops will be quite helpful in priority watersheds with water quality issues.
We actually got this HighBoy as part of a water quality demonstration. The idea is that cover crops really have a lot of benefits, soil health and otherwise, water quality being one of those. And so we funded this project in part with a NDEE, Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy, 319 grant for non-point source pollution. And the main focus there is looking at how we can use cover crops more efficiently and effectively across the state of Nebraska and get some water quality benefits out of it, as well as the soil health and crop and weed protection and everything along with that. So with this project, we've got two different options. This is a project that we're really taking care of the machine, the operator, and the seed costs for the producers. We hope to carry this on for 5 years after this year, so there will be signups in these water quality areas of concern. So they're really these special priority areas across the state where we have water quality issues. We have 2 seed mixes this year. We have rye, straight cereal rye, and we also have a 3-way mix that we're putting out on some fields, which is a cereal rye, turnip, and rapeseed mix. That mix is really one that's been popular with the people that are either trying to get through a hard pan or they're grazing with cattle. The concept, though, is that eventually that if we can show that interseeding in R5 really gives us a good establishment of the cover crops, then we can get some more of these machines and more of these units in place across the state and really get a broader coverage of cover crops that's much more applicable to farms across the state.
When it comes to planting the cover crops, there was a lot of thought that went into what to plant and why. As far as the timing, it's been established through years of extension research that the R5 stage of development in corn would be the optimal time frame to conduct this particular demonstration.
We're planting cereal rye straight or in a mix with brassicas, turnip, and rapeseed. The cereal rye is our most winter hardy cover crop in this part of the country, and it is really the most productive cover crop in corn and soybean systems. So this is a time when just before corn is starting to dry down, leaves are starting to drop, so more sunlight is coming in through the canopy, reaching the seeds that are on the ground, the cover crop seeds. So that's that light that they need to germinate. Whereas if we plant earlier in the season, a lot of times we just don't get good germination because there is not enough, there may be enough light for them to germinate, but not enough light for them to actually grow. We know it's a better time to establish it at R5 than drilling after harvest. We get better growth, we get better biomass production in the spring, here, at least here in eastern Nebraska and in rain-fed systems. The only other option to plant during that time would be by airplane, aerial seeding, or by helicopter.
Basically, the only thing this would really compete with would be an airplane. That would be your next option in this ground or in this territory. And the airplane can work, but the problem with airplane is you get seed tied up in leaves. If it's blowing that day. So basically, to overcome that, they have to put on about twice the rate. Whereas you can go here with say a 50-pound rate or a bushel an acre rate, and probably you're gonna get a good germination. So you get less cost in your seed, and also you don't have the expense of an airplane.
The partnerships that brought demonstrations like this to fruition will continue to work together in an effort to see more machines like this in the hands of our state's co-ops and custom applicators. Moving forward, it will be important to learn more about when and where methods of interseeding like this will be the most impactful around the state.
But really, to get them in place, we need to get these in the hands of our custom applicators and our co-ops. We need to get this to be a technology that's readily available across the state, and we need to get this to where interseeding at R5, we have to be able to figure out where it works most effectively and under what conditions. One of the best things about this project is that it's really been a partnership between a lot of different entities. We have financial sponsorship from the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy, but we really have strong investment from the 3 NRDs that are partnering with us this year, the Lower Platte North NRD, the Lower Platte South NRD, and the Upper Big Blue NRD. We also have significant investment from our local extension counterparts. So I'm coming out of one place and covering lots of different areas, but we've got local extension that's partnering and working with our on-farm research on each of these farms. And most significantly, we have fabulous producer partners that are willing to experiment on their ground, shred the ditches, host field days. And it really comes down to producers are interested in figuring out how to make cover crops work in their operation, and we're here to assist them in that process.
As producers around the state are going through harvest, many are probably planning for the next planting and growing season, and cover crops may be a part of those future plans. If you're producing cover crops near a priority watershed, future participation in this program could prove beneficial for you. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks for that story, Bill. Now, farmers that are interested in participating in a future project are encouraged to reach out to their local extension educator, or of course you can contact your local natural resources district. You can also learn more on this topic by following the link that's attached with this story, which is posted now on the Market Journal website. Well, it is now time to catch up with the latest activity when it comes to the grain markets. Joining us today is Darin Newsom from Darin Newsom Analysis. Darin, it's always a pleasure to have you here on Market Journal. Thanks for coming back to the program.
Well, thanks for having me on again, Bryce. Really appreciate it.
Let's begin the segment getting your general feel of these markets. What are you seeing out there?
Right now, I'm seeing a bit of a stalemate, particularly in corn and soybeans. We've still got some early harvested bushels being sold into the market, yet long-term supply and demand indicators, future spreads are showing us that we're actually more bullish than we were a year ago at this time. So we've got some selling up front. We've still got a lot of bullishness out back. And right now, it's just kind of keeping the market at an even keel, really no reason to go very far one direction or the other at this point.
With that said, Darin, what are the corn and soybean markets telling us about harvest strategies, would you say?
Yeah, if we apply the gambler's secret, in other words, knowing what to hold and knowing what to fold, right now the market's telling us to sell corn into this market because there's just no carry. There's no incentive to hold it in commercial storage. Market needs it right now. We're hearing all kinds of basis reports coming from the country. On the other hand, we've got some carry building in the Nov-Jan soybean future spread. It's only covering about 36% calculated full commercial carry. It's still not bearish, but it's not as bullish as what we're seeing in corn. So if we've got it hedged in November, we can roll those out to January and wait for basis to appreciate from October through the end of December and see how that plays out.
Darin, I think you're heading the direction I want to go with a viewer question we received this week. They're asking about ways to capture basis improvement. Hypothetically, you're selling your corn there in town or at the ethanol plant, and you've got that basis opportunity. They're worried about not being able to capture that. What kind of strategies are there to protect that?
Couple different ways you can go. Let's say you have it. Let's say you have your corn hedged in the December contract. Well, just hold that December hedge and let basis appreciate into it. I mean, that's one of the best ways of doing it. That's how merchandisers do it. Now, if you're holding it in, say, private storage and you don't have any hedges on it, then it's kind of a gamble because you also have to play the futures price at that point. but you can hold it and you can watch the basis appreciate. Now, it may not be enough to offset, let's say futures start trending down. So it may not be enough to offset that, but you can still catch a basis appreciation. Best way is to have it hedged and let the basis work into your hedge.
Okay, let's talk, Darin, let's talk about some of the other factors that seem to be popping up here, the headlines that might be influencing the markets either now or certainly down the road here. Having some challenges with transportation on the river. What can you share with our viewers about that front?
Yeah, it's going to take some wet weather this fall and winter to get some water moving back into the rivers, because right now barge freight's just skyrocketing, and so that's pressuring basis as well, because and pretty soon it's going to make it very difficult to move supplies down the river to get to port to go ahead and export. Now, watching the export numbers, we're still moving some, so it's not a catastrophe at this point. But let's just add something in there. Let's say that the railroad strike pops up again, or the potential for a railroad strike pops up again. Now we can't move it by rail. We can't move it by river. This could be a real problem for the markets. Doesn't matter if it's still long-term bullish. If we can't move it, that's going to really weigh on nearby markets.
Darin, there's a measurement of the economy I know you like to keep track of. You said kind of closely correlates there. That's box beef prices. What can you share with us about prices we're seeing here in October?
Yeah, it was September was a tough month for boxed beef, but here early in October, we're seeing the boxed beef bounce back. So, it's telling me that, maybe I'm not going to say that the worst of the economic hard times are over, but we could be stabilizing in here. And if we're starting to find some demand for this boxed beef market again, that's a good sign. That means, consumers are still willing to pay. We've seen a lot of talk about what consumers will or will not buy at this point. And so if they're stepping back in, they're not afraid of a higher priced beef market. That's a fairly bullish sign.
You and I having this conversation on Wednesday afternoon. A few hours ago, Darin, OPEC came out with an announcement they'll be slashing production, it sounds like. Your take on that?
Yeah, my take on it is it's a political play. We know this is likely coming from Russia. This is one of Putin's chess moves, particularly with U.S. midterm elections coming up next month. So we have to add all of that into the calculation. From a market point of view, as you said, we were doing this on Wednesday. It was relatively muted. I do think that we will see a rally in the energy complex as a whole, particularly in both Brent and West Texas Intermediate crude oil. Will it have any follow through or spillover into the other markets like grains and oilseeds and so on? If it is, it might be rather limited. I still think those markets are going to come down to their own fundamentals, which are still bullish. But again, then we have to add in all the other problems like barge freight and possible rail strikes and so on.
Had another viewer question I want to get to, Darin, in the broadcast section of our conversation. They want to know what could spoil the current prices we're seeing in particularly the grain and soybean complexes.
Probably the biggest thing would be continued problems along the river and a rail strike. Again, it doesn't change the long-term fundamentals. We're still going to be short supplies, but it changes the demand. And if we can't export anything, then it all comes down to, like in corn, it all comes down to ethanol and feed demand. Right now, both of those are still strong. But again, any change to demand changes the supply-demand scenario. And so I think that's the biggest risk that we have. And then if it all of a sudden turns out to be a wet winter and we start heading into next year's crop with a better situation, then that could change the mindset for the 2023 crop.
All right, Darin, final word is yours this week. What else would you like to leave our viewers with?
There's so much volatility going on right now in outside markets. And, it's really kind of leaving the grain and oil seeds alone for the most part. But we can't forget about the dollar. The dollar is going to continue to play a big role. At least it's going to continue to make big moves. So we're certainly going to have to pay attention to that. And, the overall economic standing from the U.S. and the world as a whole.
Darin, as always, we appreciate your time here on Market Journal.
Thanks again for having me on, Bryce.
You heard me ask Darin questions from you, our viewer. We always enjoy hearing from you when it comes to your concerns and thoughts on the markets. If you have any questions you'd like for me to ask Luke Beckman, who will be joining us next week, be sure to email us or get in touch on social media. Jared Learman of Beamer is excited about the future of hog production in Nebraska. Learman, who is president of the Nebraska Pork Producers Association, encourages hog producers to get involved in their state pork organization. He says it's not only a way to influence the industry, but also help stay up to date on the issues impacting the farm. You can read more from Learman in the October issue of the Nebraska Farmer. Time again for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, a little rain might have slowed things down for a day or so this past week for some producers, but it didn't seem to be a soaker statewide. How are things looking in terms of weather when we turn to the week ahead?
Well, Bryce, we did have a little light precipitation activity primarily in central Nebraska, and it wasn't that widespread, fairly narrow channel. Best reports were in the quarter-inch to half-inch range, but a lot of the totals were in that 1/10 to a quarter-inch range. So not much in the way of significant delays were expected with that precipitation event. With these dry conditions the last couple of days, pretty much it was a non-event in terms of slowing down harvest activity over a widespread area of Nebraska. Of course, that's not a surprise. We've been dealing with persistent dryness issues the entire summer, and it looks like that's going to continue at least into the foreseeable future. And unfortunately, from CPC standpoint, we look at the new release of the updated October forecast, so it goes from a preliminary to a final issue the last day of September, looking for a broad area from the south central plains all the way up through the northern plains, taking it westward through the northern Rockies and then down through the Great Basin. This is the highest risk for above normal temperatures, but we still have moderate to minor risk of above normal temperatures to our south and to our east, primarily almost all the way into the eastern Corn Belt. We've seen above normal temperature forecast. In terms of precipitation, the core area with the highest probability centered right through the nation's midsection. Eastern Nebraska has the highest probability, central Nebraska just a weak probability of below normal moisture, and then equal chances as we get out into the Panhandle and western Nebraska, with above normal moisture being projected for the central Rockies. And this was based on the idea that an upper air low would develop during the mid-month period over the northern Rockies and cut off, and that's why we see this forecast here. That has changed somewhat in the most recent models. Now, as we look at what's going on today, the cold air that was responsible, or pulled in with the response to this upper air trough, is starting to shift to our east. We're going to still remain under cool conditions today and a little bit of cloud cover, but nothing in the way of precipitation. Looking at temperatures that primarily will hold into the 60s statewide, maybe some upper 50s across the extreme northeastern Nebraska. As we go into tomorrow, that trough kind of lifts a little bit off toward the northeast. That allows slightly warmer temperatures in to the region. So we'll be looking at upper 60s across the northeast and mostly into the low to mid 70s across the remainder of the state under dry conditions. As we go into the day on Monday, we see a little bit of a wave moving on the southern periphery of this trough. Right now, this system is not expected to have much of an impact on Nebraska outside of maybe a possible wind shift. We're looking at dry conditions, and consistently we're going to stay into 70s statewide, maybe make it to the low 80s across the southwest. As we get into Tuesday, we start to see the formation of a trough over south central Canada. This is going to bring some pretty significant cold air into the northern plains and potentially the northern half of Nebraska as we work into the later part of the week. But in terms of moisture, if we see any moisture, it's most likely going to be an upslope flow situation in the northwestern part of the state, but really 1/10 of an inch would be really pushing it. As we get into the day on Wednesday, this cold air starts to really funnel through the state and will progress through the state during the afternoon hours and moving into these portions of the central plain or central Midwest as we get into late evening hours. This looks like hard freeze conditions that are likely to be up in north central and northeast Nebraska, with the potential for frost to hard freeze conditions all the way down to the I-80 corridor. On Thursday, this low pressure system really intensifies. We're going to deal with a lot of wind across northeast and northeastern Nebraska. Temperatures are going to remain cool. 50s and 60s are most likely for temperatures under cloudy conditions, maybe some light precipitation, but at this point, the models are indicating less than 1/10 of an inch. As we get into the day on Friday, we start to see this trough starting to break apart somewhat. We start to see that ridge building in and much warmer conditions as we work in through late next week and the following week. If we look farther out in the future, 8 to 14 day forecast next Thursday, the following Tuesday, we can see those new normal conditions as the cold air moves out and the warm air moves into our region. And in terms of precipitation, below normal is the name of the game.
Thank you for that update, Al. Finally today, it's been a notable week in terms of agriculture news. To catch up on all the latest, we turn now to Alex Voicoskie. Alex, it sounds like UNL has a new leader for ag research.
Yeah, that's right, Bryce. Derek McLean has been selected as the next dean of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Agricultural Research Division. McLean will begin the appointment on January 1st, succeeding Archie Clutter, who will retire at the end of the year. In his new role, McLean will lead all initiatives related to agriculture and natural resources research, as well as 3 research extension and education centers across Nebraska. Happening in North Platte this week, a groundbreaking ceremony for Sustainable Beef LLC. The recurring theme from the ceremony, it's a generational investment.
I think this is a big deal. It's so important, not just for the community in North Platte, but the entire region, and the huge economic impact this is going to have on the state of Nebraska as well. This is generational.
Sustainable Beef is a meat processing plant being built in North Platte. Earlier this fall, Walmart announced that it signed an agreement to invest in a minority stake in the rancher-owned company. And so far, 26 feedlots have committed their cattle to the plant.
Between 2014 and 2018, there were some packing plants that were closed, and that actually reduced the number of the amount of capacity in the United States. And so we was estimated about 4% short of shackle space. Our plant will be about 1.5% of the nation's supply, and so we're taking up, roughly 40% of that shortfall. And so we think that that's a kind of a nice addition. We definitely don't want to produce like 20% more, because then we have overcapacity again, so it's not good for anybody.
The facility will be over 500,000 square feet with the capacity to process more than 1,500 cattle per day. It's anticipated to create almost 900 jobs. Finally, some heartbreaking news coming out of the Sandhills this week. A wildfire was reported last Sunday at the Nebraska National Forest at Halsey. Since then, one man has died and about 19,000 acres have been engulfed. That includes much of the Nebraska State 4-H camp located near Halsey. More than 200 firefighters have been on the scene to fight the blaze. Bryce?
Alex, any status on the tree nursery that's located up there at Halsey?
Yeah, actually, so reports of, quote, aggressive firefighting saved that forest campground and the Bessie Tree Nursery. It provides seedlings for the state's conservation tree planting program.
A little bit of good news there with all the destruction. We appreciate the update, Alex. Well, that is all the time we have for this week's episode of Market Journal. Throughout the week, you can keep up with the Market Journal team by following us on social media. You'll also want to subscribe to Market Journal on YouTube to see full episodes plus some bonus content. Until next time, I'm Bryce Duskett, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.